the Norwegian Nobel Committee is about to announce the winner of the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize.
Good morning, everyone.
Listen in.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Peace Prize for 2024 to the Japanese organization Nihon Hidankyo. This grassroots movement of atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, also known as Hibakusha, is receiving the Peace Prize for its efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons, and for demonstrating through witness testimony that nuclear weapons must never be used again. In response to the atomic bombs attacks of August 1945, a global movement arose whose members have worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of using nuclear weapons. Gradually, a powerful international norm developed, stigmatizing the use of nuclear weapons as morally unacceptable. This norm has become known as the nuclear taboo. The testimony of the Hibakusha, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is unique in this larger context. These historical witnesses have helped to generate and consolidate widespread opposition to nuclear weapons around the world by drawing on personal stories, creating educational campaigns based on their own experience, and issuing urgent warnings against the spread and use of nuclear weapons. The Hibakusha helps us describe the indescribable, to think the unthinkable, and to grasp the incomprehensible pain and suffering caused by nuclear weapons. The Norwegian Nobel Committee wishes nevertheless to acknowledge one encouraging fact. No nuclear weapons have been used in war in nearly 80 years. The extraordinary efforts of Nihon Hidankyo and other representatives of the Hibakusha have contributed greatly to the establishment of the nuclear taboo. It is therefore alarming that today this taboo against the use of nuclear weapons is under pressure. The nuclear powers are modernizing and upgrading their arsenals. New countries appear to be preparing to acquire nuclear weapons, and threats are being made to use nuclear weapons as part of ongoing warfare. At this moment in human history, it is worth reminding ourselves what nuclear weapons are: the most destructive weapon the world has ever seen. Next year will mark 80 years since 2 American atomic bombs killed an estimated of 120,000 inhabitants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A comparable number died of burn and radiation injuries in the months and years that followed. Today's nuclear weapons have far greater destructive power. They can kill millions and would impact the climate catastrophically. A nuclear war could destroy our civilization. The fates of those who survived the infernos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were long concealed and neglected. In 1956, local Hibakusha Association, along with victims of nuclear weapon tests in the Pacific, formed the Japan Confederation of A and H Bomb Sufferers Organization. This name was shortened to Nihon Hidankyo. It would become the largest and most influential Hibakusha organization in Japan. The core of Alfred Nobel's vision was the belief that committed individuals can make a difference. In awarding this year's Nobel Peace Prize to Nihon Hidankyo, the Norwegian Nobel Committee wishes to honor all survivors who, despite physical suffering and painful memories, have chosen to use their costly experience to cultivate hope and engagement for peace. Nihon Hidankyo has provided thousands of witness accounts, issued resolutions and public appeals, and sent annual delegations to the United Nations and a variety of peace conferences to remind the world of the pressing need for nuclear disarmament. One day, the Hibakusha will no longer be among us as witnesses to history, but with a strong culture of remembrance and continued commitment, new generations in Japan are carrying forward the experience and the message of the witnesses. They are inspiring and educating people all over the world. In this way, they are helping to maintain the nuclear taboo, a precondition of a peaceful future for humanity. The decision to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2024 to Nihon Hidankyo is securely anchored in Alfred Nobel's will. This year's prize joins a distinguished list of peace prizes that the committee has previously awarded to champions of nuclear disarmament and control. The Nobel Peace Prize for 2024 fulfills Alfred Nobel's desire to recognize efforts of the greatest benefit to humankind. Thank you.
Stolt Halsnes, Norwegian TV2. With all the conventional military conflicts going on in the world right now,
So we've just had the Nobel Peace Prize 2024 awarded to a Japanese organization, a grassroots organization, Nihon Hidankyo, which is a nationwide organization of survivors of the nuclear attacks of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That breaking news there here on BBC News, that this Japanese organization of survivors of the nuclear bombs of the Second World War have won the Nobel Peace Prize for 2024. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale is with me here on BBC News, listening to the announcement of the Nobel Peace Prize. James, your reaction, because of course we never know. We know who's nominated, but we never have an idea of who wins.
We don't even know who's nominated. It's just educated guesses. But under the rules, you cannot know who was nominated for another 50 years. But there's lots of educated guesses. Clearly, my reaction to this is twofold. One is the committee have gone for safety first. It's a non-controversial choice. But also, secondly, it's a pointed choice. It's non-controversial because there are a lot more controversial suggestions on the list that maybe organisations that are involved in the war in the Middle East, perhaps the UN Agency for the Palestinians, UNRWA, we know that that had been nominated. The International Court of Justice had been nominated. All of these were far more controversial options. So going for a grassroots organisation that represents the hundreds of thousands alive and dead Japanese who died in those two nuclear explosions at the end of the Second World War. There are still about 100,000 of them, of the Hibakusha as they're known, still living, is definitely a safety first option in terms of the politics. But it is also a pointed one, because what the committee is saying is, look, the threat of nuclear war is still out there. We might be more concerned at the moment by conventional conflicts in the Middle East, in Ukraine, but actually both of those conflicts have involved the threat of nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin has hinted repeatedly throughout this war against Ukraine that if the Allies, their supporters of Ukraine, escalated beyond a certain point, he would be prepared in principle to use nuclear weapons. He's made hints, nods, winks throughout this process to try and deter Western action. Also in the Middle East, the fear of Iran gaining a nuclear capability is a driving force in Israeli policy making at the moment. So that is against those drivers, if you like, that the committee, I think, has probably made that decision.
Indeed, and we heard at the very beginning, as the prize was announced to Nihon Hidankyo, the Nobel Prize for Peace Prize for 2024 was announced. There was this. The idea of the taboo against the use of nuclear weapons is under pressure. We heard the organisers, the Nobel Peace Prize announcement saying that these nuclear powers are modernising and they're enhancing their arsenal of nuclear weapons, which speaks to what you just said.
Well, look, if you talk to, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine. If you talk to many Ukrainians, they will say the biggest mistake their country made was to give up their nuclear weapons after the breakup of the Soviet Union in return for supposed security guarantees from the West, which they say failed and have been proven to fail. And so therefore that is an argument that people are making, saying, actually, we want nuclear weapons because the rest of the world sees the leverage that Vladimir Putin has had over the West because of his possession of nuclear weapons, and they want to have a slice of that if they possibly can. We've talked a great deal in this studio during the war of Ukraine about just how concerned the White House, as led by President Biden and some of his advisors, are concerned about the fear of escalation. Let's not give Ukraine another weapon just in case Russia escalates. And that ultimate fear of escalation is the possible use maybe of some kind of tactical nuclear weapon. And so what this committee is saying is let's push back against that, and let's do so by rewarding an organization which is devoted in Japan to try and reduce ensure that nuclear weapons are not used again, but also reduce the number of warheads that are in the world.
And James, what does winning the Nobel Peace Prize mean for an organisation? Because during my travels to Ukraine, I met up with Alexandra Matvichuk. She's head of the Centre for Civil Liberties, and she was one of 3 organisations that won the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. And it really enhanced her ability, her access to reach dignitaries, people in power. It opened doors for this organisation in Japan that arguably worldwide, how many people really know about their work? Of course, in Japan, it is well known and it's important, but worldwide, what will this mean for this organisation, Nihon Hidankyo?
Well, as you say, it will give huge publicity to the organisation. There will be many people who will learn about it for the first time who perhaps not heard about it. There's a sum of money involved, about $1 million. So, organisations like this always need more money. But I think what it will do, as you say, it will open doors and perhaps maybe spark another debate. If you think about it, most of the focus at the moment is on conventional warfare because it is a bloody, conventional war is bad. It's not, when we talk about this, quite often people say, well, conventional war isn't as bad. About the estimate at the moment is 1,000 Russian soldiers are dying a day in eastern Ukraine. I mean, that's a lot of people. And I think what this committee's decision will do is it will potentially spark another debate about nuclear warfare, the use of, the threat of, the ownership of, in a way that I think we haven't had for some years. Whether it actually changes any policy making, I think remains to be seen. As ever, with a lot of the committee's strike rate is not always great. For example, many years ago, the committee rewarded the Egyptian Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian Prime Minister, and then the Israeli leader Menachem Begin after the Camp David Accords that did bring peace for many years between Israel and Egypt. But then a few years later, the Oslo Accords in the mid-90s. People like Yasser Arafat, the PLO leader, and the then Israeli Prime Minister were also rewarded. But as we know, the Oslo Accords did not succeed. So the committee's sort of strike rate on this is mixed.
James, as always, really good to have you on set as we were learning about that. James Landale, many thanks. And just for people joining us, so we have just heard the Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to a Japanese grassroots organisation. It's called Nihon Hidankyo, and it's the Norwegian Nobel Committee said that this group, which is made up of atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was being recognised for its work to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons.